That's on you, Jim Lindigi, Chus Soyadi, Chasan, Dembani let in the Sovares. It's not Dembani, no good to Dembata, to the Bassadi. Chu Kandichi in here, Chu T. Tendo more, good to Dembachita, to the Banica more in your essay. All those channels one. Kissing that the naked Dembaris de Korea Shirua.
Good evening. When we last were together 6 weeks ago, we looked at the two truths, the truth of the conventional truth and the ultimate truth. And Buddha Shakyamuni presented how all phenomena have both entities. Each phenomenon has both entities of the conventional truth and its ultimate truth.
Jidanga yu kare shine shingdang medola soba kare na yu di na di kunzup tempa de che da deni ge na wa na shin nga zo la kanes nengo re sine nang du kabla kala ya mo da rang ngwe ne tupe shi nengo ro wa che da deni rang ngwe ne tupe ge ngo na wa na shin je ba che na dong sang chi ga nie me dong sang chi dong ba cha ko ngo dong ba cha ko re di an de nam de ba as ma da ma je ba ina korong 뭐 예대 받지 디 군소 때 받지다 최근 지인의 디디도 뭐 돈제 때 받던 군소 때 받니 요래 시다 돈제 때 받아야지 나와 나신 간에 두스 제바나 가야 녀면 동상지 뭐 이거 디 동받니 있어야지 돈제 받으려 했어야지.
Phenomena such as flowers or trees, these are illustrations of conventional truths. But when one investigates whether the conventional truth, such as a flower or a tree, exists in the way that it appears, does it exist by way of its own nature, one investigates and comes to see that it does not exist in the way that it appears. It is empty of existing in the way that it appears. That then is where one realizes the ultimate nature, the ultimate truth, which is that phenomena are empty of inherent existence. So when one does not investigate, and the way that phenomena appear to one, that is their conventional existence. But when one comes to investigate and comes to realize that they do not exist in the way that they appear, they are empty of true existence, one realizes the ultimate truth.
Lue shapa la ma de rang ngwen ye tu ba na wa na shin shin nang go re na yo de di na wa na shin res de ni ge na ya di da na wa di de ni ge ga lai ma de rang ngwen de tu ba na wa na shin rang ngwen ni ga lai ma de rang ngwen ni tu de ba di yo ma re de ni ki nang go de ni na ya di da dem ba tu ba a se go re ra shin tu ba dem ba tu ba se ga cha di re ji san de ni ge na wa na ji yo re san bi jin ba di da nga ji yo re san bi sam lo di de den jin si wo ra den jin.
When one sees how the conventionally existent object appears to one, one sees that it appears as if it exists by way of its own inherent nature, its own essence. That's how it appears. And this appearance of true existence or inherent existence or existing by way of its own essence, this is the object of negation. And then a consciousness that grasps at this appearance, that believes that the object exists in the way that it appears, this consciousness is called the consciousness of true grasping.
Kāla mā tuywa kōrōng ngōi nē chūp tuywa chī nēng kōre nā wā nā yō rē sēmbē sāmbō dē tā ngā tā tō chūpa sēmbē tā sēn sēn tēn sēn sēn nā dī sē kōrō wā chī sā dī hā mō kō wā chē ngā zō dī kēn chē ngā zō nyō mō bā tsa wā yō sō chā sā tsa yō kū dī tē rē sē tē lā tēn lī kōrō chī sā dī dēne kī lō dī kī dzēmbā nā shīn ngā dī dūyē mīndū chē bā chē chē dī hā kōyā dī ngōyō nī sū dā hā kōyā dī kē chē mbō rē sā chī ngā sō dī kōr mā dā shē dī dī kōr shē kōr wā dā ngā
sō. The primary fault we make is in relation to our sense of self, our sense of I, in that our sense of I appears to us as being self-existent, just like all other phenomena do. Then we have a consciousness, the same consciousness of true grasping, that grasps at the I as existing in the way that it appears. And it's from this consciousness of true grasping that grasps at the I as existing in the way that it appears, that all our other afflicted minds come. All suffering comes from this root cause. And it's important that we come to understand this. And it's important we come to not just intellectually understand it, but recognize it deeply from within for ourselves. And in order to first intellectually understand and then to be able to recognize it for ourselves, this is why we are looking at this particular topic.
Dela gacha ranshin nam melu ni so da gacha ranshin drupa gacha said ranshin nam da me ba so da do drupa da said ranshin said ranshin gacha de ranshin drupa rang when the drupa sa da do drupa said yo mares da melu ni is me ba me dang ganes yo mares in da melu ni so da and then ma rangje so dada rangje miso ki su thon da yi toba da nywa so yu yunang jirawa shin charyang ga shi yu je da ga sha di ranshin nam rangwa yongoi yobam yu rang ngoi ne druba da wo shi nang ye sa nang so tin shi nang go re sa.
Now turning to the text in the middle of page 9, starting beneath the next outline, but this outline that I inserted I think may be mistaken. We'll just ignore that outline, keep this as part of the preceding outline of the two truths. So looking then at the second paragraph, with respect to that, the system establishing that there is no inherently existent object of negation or selflessness is as follows. Here, so this, looking at the first sentence then, the system establishing that there is no inherently existent object of negation or selflessness is as follows. So here comes the presentation on selflessness, or how to eliminate the object of negation, true existence or self-existence. Then the text continues. Each object of the sense powers, such as form perceived by the eyes, and objects of experience that are cognized by the mental faculty, whatever object appears is the basis of negation for the object of negation, inherent existence. They appear to be existent, existing by way of their own independent essence, existing in their own right.
Dalai Chayinde and Datu Drupa said. Is that da said. Is not rushing Drupam da said the Benangala, Ngala Chay, the Nga said, Gala Cheer, Gala Maduba, Lupa, Shapala Madu, Korong, Drubachi, Yena, di rushing Drupa, yes, or Della, Dadu Drupa, Kansa, Dadu Drupa Lagore, Della mean rushing Drupa Lagore. She's a di Gasha, yes. Dika way the res kacha so the coca way is what that.
In the first sentence there, at the end of the line, we see object of negation. So the object of negation is true existence or self-existence, inherent existence. And this is how phenomena appear to us. And when it's in relation to the self, we call it the self appears to be truly existent. In other words, it appears as if it exists by way of its own essence, which means it appears as if it is independent and unchanging. And this is how all phenomena appear to us.
Just long ya gawores, Lungolpa, Nang Machuache, that didn't call Nangoro, Nang Zingorwa, just not Denigi Lolia, nang ma ju jin ma ju ba ji pa ga ho re si ba ga se de ga se ko ji ye ba ji le me ba so ya ji shi ma de da ga re yo se na nga zu lo le ya din nang go re si jin nang ma ju ba ji ga ya da lui pa jin go re di jin ma ju ba ji ga ho re so da ga se ga cha ga se de 제 가자도 요 말을 와서 매나 간스가 고래라나 매나 홀로는 난걸 효바나 난거래서 딘나와데 낭마 주에 까고래서 나에 파가지 벤 미글 난거 미값샤바나 나요 말 까고로와 페니 외지리 요바나 안주기 외디 미글이야 샤르데 미글이야 외디 까고서도 미글이야 지 값샤바나 미글 낭마 까고로와 디나신 가자디 라신 두바데 로르파 난거래 로디기 진고래 제자한테 곧 가세 로디기를 진마주바 제 까고래서 제자 로디 진마주바 까고래서 저거 로디를 진마주바이나 되네 로디를 유디면에 로호랑 길리게지 매와 차르고와 그 유진에 유디면에 로디 매와 차르고와 제자 로디를 파 롱을 파 까지 롱을 진비 롱을들 파 까고래 나야 진에 파 까고래서 그래 가자 요 말해지 요 말에 대한 까고 매나야 까고래 아니 간스 까고래 이거 요 말을 까야 말을 와래 그러와 내가 까를 까고서 로는 능고래 나와도 까고 낭마주 까고래서 뇌 진고래 디 진마주 까고래 그요 말에 대 가자도 요 말에 대뇌 진고래 디 까주 진마주 까고래서 다 까셔야 돼.
The object of negation is true existence, and in the back of the text, there are a number of synonyms for true existence are mentioned. True existence, self-existence, inherently existent. This is the object of negation. But it actually doesn't exist. There is no such thing as true existence. Yet it appears to us. So how does one have as an object of negation something that doesn't exist? Well, the problem we have is that despite it not existing, it keeps appearing to us. It continuously appears to us. All objects appear to consciousness as existing by way of their own essence. So we have this appearance of something that doesn't exist. And then we have a consciousness that grasps at it. So we need to eradicate the object of negation, despite it being a non-existent, true existence, because it keeps appearing to us, and then we have a consciousness that grasps at it. And it is from this grasping consciousness that the consciousness that grasps at objects as existing by way of their own nature, that all our other afflictions arise and our suffering follows. Therefore, what we really need to abandon is the consciousness of true grasping. In order to be able to abandon that, we need to negate or refute the true existence. Because it's through eradicating true existence, despite it not existing, that we'll be able to prevent it from, or cease it from appearing, and therefore we'll be able to bring an end to a consciousness that grasps at it as existing in the way that it appears.
Melu ni sigduada yo mare la rota kache de yo mares ranshin juba ta juba se yo mares ta medan gane je lamna dada ranri mi miso ki su thongwa dang se dang mi gi pha sul pha ta mi lia suk ti nang go suk thong go wa suk thon ne yi gi ode de suk tu se ya to ya da suk ti to pa da ani nyon wa so ane denegi migi suk tongo ore ane yigi shepe suk de to ores to ane ine dane kar suk de nangdu ganes nangore lana yu nang jida chik char yang ganes nangyo ba ine yang gashi se de yu dirwa ka na ya medo de gashi de an de dang gasha ge rang ranshin wo nangores gasha di gang lai ma de rang mo ni tu ba nangores gashi se de an ju ge medo de 수 낭요의 낭을 메도드 통비 미기 셰바디 메도드 통숙드 통 안독바디 숙 진거레스 이나 숙디 수롤 될 낭을 간스 낭거르스나 라신 주바 랑원의 주바 강래 마텨바 랑원의 주바 낭거레지레 Geshe the Yu Tibetan said. Yu Tibetan, Deta Gasha Ranshin Nam said Tibador.
Each object are the sense powers, such as form, perceived by the eyes, and objects of experience that are cognized by the mental faculty. Whatever object appears is the basis of negation for the object of negation, inherent existence. What this means then is every phenomenon that appears to consciousness, whether it appears via the sense consciousnesses or via the mental consciousness, it appears as being self-existent, every phenomenon. So we heard previously, or in the previous segment, the term object of negation. Here we get basis of negation. So the object of negation is true existence. If the object that appears as truly existent to consciousness is, for example, a flower, then that flower is the basis of negation, and its true existence is the object of negation. So the flower is, for example, the flower is the basis of negation. The object of negation of the flower is its true existence. They appear to be existent, existing by the way of their own independent essence, existing in their own right. So this is how all phenomena appear to consciousness. Again, whether the consciousness is a sense consciousness, so it's an object of sight, an object of sound or taste, or to the mental consciousness. They appear as if they exist by way of their own essence, independent essence, or to express it differently, existing in their own right.
Migi sheba dele medo nangore, medo nawa nashi medo yorbe sende yore hechere. Ta medo na yundu medo rangu ngwene chuba, rangshin yu chuba, lui pa shaba la ma tuba rangu ngwene yoba de nangore, di nawa nashi yorbe sende dine yomare es. Chizan lui pa shaba la ma tuba nawa nashin chik yomare es, kaso lui shaba es. Chizan shen la ma tuba, kang la ma tuba rangu ngwene chuba nawa nashin chik yomare es, kaso ko shen la dugo was. Chizan din nang zu Galai Matuba Rangun Tuba, Lupa Tapa, Shabala Matuba Rangun Tuba, Nangore, Chizadi Nawana Shinji, Yorbe Yomaresane, Tadi Nawana Yomares.
Staying with the illustration of a flower that appears to consciousness, so for example, if one sees it, it appears to sense consciousness. Does that flower exist? That flower that is appearing to the eye sense consciousness? Yes, it exists. But how is it appearing to the sense consciousness? It appears as being truly existent. And does that exist? A truly existent flower? That does not exist. So a distinction is being made here. The flower that appears to consciousness, that exists. But the way that it appears as being truly existent, that does not exist. There is not a truly existent flower because there's no such thing as true existence.
Desa manzuki medo tongi migi sheba deda sheba digi chusheres. Karasan kolaya medo naidur rangun juba nengore nawana shinji yomarwa zoko chuares. Dinashi di zimbiki tokpa iki sheba tokpa diki ne nayon kala rangun juba lupa shabala matu rangun juba nengores. Just nawana shinji yomarwas. Medo nawan nengore de medo nawana medo yore de ine medo di nayon deda nyumdo rangun juba shala matu bar 지금 권유 줍도 있는 거. 네 나와나지 매바래. 세상 그 취시리에서 오래. 이기 셰바나 미기 셰바 차상 똑같은 이기 미기 셰바 숙통의 미기 셰바다 숙진비 이 똑같이 차상단 취시리에서 오래.
Whether this flower is appearing to a sense consciousness, such as being seen, or purely a mental consciousness, for example, being remembered, the flower exists, but the way that it appears as being truly existent, this does not exist. So therefore, the consciousness to which the truly existent flower appears is mistaken. It's a mistaken consciousness, whether sense or mental. And why is that sense consciousness or mental consciousness mistaken? Because the flower does not exist in the way that it appears. It does not exist truly. Therefore, the consciousness is mistaken.
And in ma di neki like the di neki labdu nang yudu kapla rang mun tuba nawa inza and neki said this one di neki so Tony Onsum no topiki yeshe ma Tony Onsum no tope yeshe mayin bigi yeshe mato bigi sheba la trishe imbe chap sidida Tony Onsum tope yeshe mayin sheba kanishine semjen gula 맞아 semjen규 뭐 상계 말에 semjen규 동의 원선도 비시 마인비기 셰바 간듯이나 차상 취시리스 가르레람나 콜나 유 간듯이나와 이내야 랑원이 좀 난고레스 진짜 랑고 좀 나와나 신직 요 말와 매반자 콜야 매바지 나디고레 이제 취시리스 그래 디네기스로한 디네기스네 가르스네 나요도 갈라 랑원이 좀 나와 인장 안에 동용 옷도 배 많이 베게다 시아바간디시네 취시래라고. 취시 임베 찹라도 취시 임 고고래서 그러다.
This paragraph then concludes, therefore, an essential point is that except for the exalted wisdom directly realizing emptiness, all other consciousnesses are necessarily mistaken. The first point then to point out that this is referring to non-Buddhas, to sentient beings. So for non-Buddhas, for sentient beings, all other consciousnesses, all consciousnesses other than the wisdom that is directly realizing emptiness are necessarily mistaken. So for a non-Buddha, there's only one consciousness, and that is the consciousness that is realizing emptiness directly. Only that consciousness is unmistaken. All others, whether sense or mental, are mistaken.
medo ane kalama rangun ruba na na dirisha so yawa che di be kale khabu chador dang dusine rangun ruba na na jindi yo mare simde medo dia meba ru chin na le ya nyanga yore 진짜 medo de na na di yo ba sam ta di medo rang kalama rangun ruba yo ba de na di yo ba ru chi denige loli 방안 줄래 denige loli ya de lui le ngo 진짜 di na na ni che ba yawa che di kale khabu ra yo ting cha ko re.
For us, so as was mentioned in a couple of segments before, the flower that appears, the flower does exist, there is a flower, but the way that it appears as being truly existent, there is no such thing as a truly existent flower because there is no such thing as true existence. That being said, the way that the flower appears to us is that the flower itself, as well as it appearing to be truly existent, these are mixed. The true existence and the flower are so entwined in the way that they appear to us that we can't easily divide it. It's not as if we can readily tell, well, this is the flower, and this is the flower that appears to be truly existent. They are entwined. We can't readily divide them or separate them.
개발을 하고 와지래 가려서네 매도 진비기 미기 셰바지어와 디 매도 미기 셰바디 매도 코로나 추거 말했으네 매도를 추와 말해라고 그런 게 진다 유디 미기 매도 진비기 셰바 미기 셰바 진다 유디 가서 매도들이 그런 게 매도 진바 나신 돌라 매도 여되래 지상 그런 게 매도 또고 또 봐나 돌라 매도 여되래 지상 그런 유 진다 유 매도들을 추요 말했어 안에 가화를 추구어서는 Medo the Nan, Konayu, Nawadi Tuore, Rashing Tuba Nan, Nangore, Rashing Tuba Yomar, the Ine called Tuba Nashi, Nangore, the Nawadi Tuore, Mato, Rangi Zintayu Tua Mari, in Zakoro, and Samashagore. Dematuba Nangorwa. Demba Tubaki Meto, Demba Tuba Nango, Meto, now the Demba Tuba Nangore, Rang Muni Tuba Kala, Rang Muni Tuba Nangore, Dele Tuare. Now you did Demba Tuba Yiminki Shoma, Nangan Ganes Nangore, Lana, Kala Rang Muni Tuba Nangore, Dele Tugore. To go around now and Ashi Yomarwa.
To go a little deeper into this topic. So, as was mentioned, the flower does exist. The flower that one sees or recalls, this does exist. But the way that it appears as being truly existent, this is mistaken. It does not exist in the way that it appears. There is no truly existent flower. So the consciousness that is apprehending this flower, on one hand, is mistaken, and on the other, is actually unmistaken. And it's unmistaken in that the flower exists. It is mistaken because the way the flower exists, the way the flower appears is not how it exists. So therefore, the consciousness has an aspect that is both mistaken and one unmistaken. And this is because the object of the mode of apprehension, or a synonym, the engaged object, is the flower. So the engaged object is the flower, and the engaged object of this consciousness is the flower, and because the flower exists, the engaged object, or the object of the mode of apprehension, exists, and therefore, in relation to the flower itself, the consciousness is unmistaken. But in relation to how the object is appearing to the consciousness as being truly existent, flower doesn't exist in this way. So here, in this regard, the consciousness is mistaken because the way the object, the flower is appearing, in other words, the appearing object, the flower does not exist in the way that it appears. So therefore, the consciousness is mistaken with regard to its appearing object, but unmistaken with regard to its engaged object.
Delia the Rimbaru just Chaba Kashi Chedua, Bene Medo Zimbe Washi Digi, now you labna, now you do Yoro, now you Yorwa, now you do Gore. Just a Medo Horon, now you chat. That Medo Zimbe Washi Digi, Zinda Yuri, now you're Nigacha, Medo Zimbigi, Migi Sheba Digi, now you'll do Gore, now you'll trio mare, now you'll do Gore, Zinda you do Gore, Yato. Karil Trugor is Temperatuba Nawala Trugor, Temperatuba Nang, then now, Temperatuba Nawala Trugor, Mato, Meto Nawala Trua Mare, Meto Nawala Trio Mare, Metola Trio Mare, Metola Trio Mare, Meto now you Trio Mare. Tell a Nangsu de la Ningura, Meto Nasu Chiche, Meto di Rashin Tuba Nasu, Nasu Niligua. Just Medo now to the trio, my Medo now at Dagaran Coyote, Medo now at the trio, Mare, Medo le trio, Mare, and the Karilu tours in Medo Rashi to Banao. They cover Jimbal Mouse and Rimbo Sum Chen the Shiawotua.
So we've peeled a few layers off this onion, but there are a few more to go. So the flower exists, so that the consciousness in relation to the flower itself, that flower itself is the object, and here would be called the engaged object or the object of the mode of apprehension. That flower exists, so therefore the engaged object exists and the consciousness is unmistaken towards it. The consciousness is also unmistaken to the appearing object, because the flower does appear to the consciousness, and the consciousness is unmistaken with regard to its appearing object as well, because what appears to the flower, what appears to the consciousness is the flower. So the appearing object is the flower too, and the flower exists, so that it's unmistaken with regard to the appearing object. But what also appears So now a third part. What also appears is true existence, which doesn't exist. This is where the mistake lies.
Sema meba am siwa da na kala worsen su so gi sema meba am ndin ma din ma lo shan ji ge le yang na lo chui bi gi chin ju lo gi ngor ye ba zam ji ngo che na meba mi si ba mi ju ram sena sin din ge da den do ba li go re ji.
Now a question is posed, or a doubt arises. In that case, are there no valid cognizers positing phenomena such as forms as conventionally existent? If that is so, non-existence would be impossible because the criterion for a phenomenon to exist conventionally would be determined by a mistaken, incorrect awareness.
And the Karila was in Susogi Chi, Tanya de Yobanam. 지동안 주수다 다디 로자 차상 탄인도 유비기 최 차상 가는데 네 여봐 조세기로 세마지 고그레스 레마로 세마지 고그레스 제가 대진 아주 갈랍스네 메도 준비 왕시의 추시를 나오르와 제가도 숙준비 왕시에다 숙준비 또바 차상 추시를 나오르와 제가 되네 라요도 안단 술로서베 탄이비 최 차상 예그 여봐 조지 여봐 조별로디 로 세마지 고그르와스 로 세마 마이나 and ding or yoba zambi and yores and laptu maru as or that on the jikti lagor. So get che tanya de yobana, Georgie lo Tsema mebam, Sidulo Tsemaji ingugres, de Georgie lo Tsemaji mena, maina, and ding or yobala, yobas in the Shatu Midu acid, the Dopadile jiktire.
The first sentence in the question, in that case, are there no valid cognizers positing phenomena such as forms as conventionally existent? The thought behind this doubt is that for a conventionally existent phenomenon to exist, it needs to be cognized by a valid cognizer. But we've just heard that a conventional phenomenon, such as a flower, is apprehended by a mistaken consciousness. So this poses some doubt. For the flower to be known to exist, it needs to be recognized by a valid cognizer. But now it's also being said that this flower, which is a conventional phenomenon, the consciousness that cognizes it is mistaken. So this is where the doubt arises. Again, because for any object, form and mental objects, they need to be recognized by a valid cognizer. Whereas now it's being said that phenomena such as a flower are being cognized by a mistaken consciousness.
Suk toye wanshe mi toye wanshe de trishe ina ko trishe re ko no tris jesa ko method yo ba sha tu ma re se wor da don da de lo wor method mi wanshe di da dinga tenju bi ge ka se method mi wanshe de trishe re la ro jesa kyorong method mi wanshe da suk toye wanshe de trishe la ge na ko lo no tris wa tru de re was tru de ba nan ko tru de ba ne yu di yo ba sha tu ma ro was Kesi ko chuba ina yang ane ko yudi yore lagina ane chasan yoba charu kores meba se chaya ma kaze lo chuba chasan yudi lo chuba digi ngor yoba la yoba shaba ina dine meba se de chaya ma chasan yoba chagi ese ko doba di lebre koronge kar samgoro sene suk thonbe da mi thon wanshe di chasan chushe ma samgoro da chuba ina ko yu thon na shin 유디 샤투 마레스 코 노트레디어스 로코로 노트레 제상 코 노트지 통하지라 요레랍나 디고 마레스 제상 코 마노바 마추아치고 그레스 제상 결혼이 텐주베 결혼이 미수셰바 수기시 미수라소바다 메도 데니게 통이시 왕셰디게 차셰바디 추셰를 라기도와 추셰랍나 코 추시 인자 그 유샤와디 마추 쉐바 체마지 샤고르마도 추셰네 체마차요 말바스 체마 마차나 아니 그 여발라 샤투 말레스 체마 마임바나 그 여발라 샤투를 라네 되네 메바지에 차요 말 차사 여바 차도 그래다 거래.
The reason this person has this doubt is the way their understanding is that a sense consciousness is unmistaken in regards to the objects it cognizes. If a sense consciousness is mistaken, well, obviously there is a fault within the consciousness. And if there's a fault within the consciousness, it cannot be relied on. It's not at all dependable. And here, now Prasangika are saying, actually sense consciousnesses are necessarily mistaken. We heard just in this preceding sentence that all consciousnesses other than wisdom directly realizing emptiness are necessarily mistaken. So therefore all sense consciousnesses are mistaken. And if this sense consciousness, for example, is mistaken, it's not reliable, it has a fault in it. Therefore, it cannot posit anything or establish anything as existing. And if it can't establish things that exist, it also can't establish things that don't exist. So the person who has this doubt, they really are subtly on shaky grounds. They're wondering how the Prasangika can assert that anything to exist, and thereby, if you can't assert things to exist, you certainly cannot assert things not to exist. Hence the doubt.
That in my young Lotrua, Chinju logo, more Yoba, Zamji, Yogo Chena, Meba Missiber, Migurams. Chisna Lo Chinju lo said that Ko Yoba had the Lo Semaji was, Chisna Lo Chinju lo Chigi Yudi, more pa Yoba Zamla, Yore Labina, didn't Yoba Tiwaina, then Yogo Chena said, Yoba Tiwaina, Yuchu Yobana. Dine meba misibares, meba gyurugus, dine maribes, vajuatam migurams and juatan goro.
This is made clear then in the second sentence within the question. If that is so, non-existence would be impossible because the criterion for a phenomenon to exist conventionally would be determined by a mistaken, incorrect awareness. So again, this person believes that only an unmistaken consciousness can assert things or posit things to exist, and therefore can also assert things that do not exist. Whereas the Prasangika are saying, actually, all bar one specific consciousness is mistaken. Now this person is saying, if all these consciousnesses are mistaken, nothing can be posited as existent. And therefore, if you can't posit something to exist, you certainly can't posit something else not to exist.
Lo chua chinji lo yu chile zimbai zimban zinyo and dela yuena yugo chugu mares. Karasane ko lo loxir was. Jesan ko tonga di no chu chader. Jesan lo chinji lo yu dige yuba yu le yuba yu relabna di yugo chugu mares. Jesan that lo change lo you do yobane you chogre labna then krom chasan yoba charo meba kine me chagores meba kine meba chagores da dondala ko karus korongi dopalangan karsun gosen suk toye wanshe digi chushi suk toye wanshe digi suk toye wanshe di chushi ina sul chugore samgor da khoda karasne sul chugor koronge karasam gorasne dikhelenge digi suk toy wanshe da medo toy wanshe digi chushe mares lo denhyre chemares 제상 그런 거 죽통하나 저 죽여야 자고 다 전주버 저런 게 죽토 와시의 취시를 납나 콜로 취시지기 를 출발해 그 율라 아니 여봐 전기 유엔나 지금 말했어 얘네 안에 콜로 추와자다가 되고 로셰 차르고 그랬어 진짜 로셰에서 그 로셰지기 율을 유엔나 유를 납나 지금 말했어 제가 결혼 딜랍나 지금 말했음 거다 땡겨볼 해야지 파지와 다이 되는 거
The reason for this doubt is because the understanding of the person posing this question is that only an unmistaken consciousness can posit things to exist or assert that something exists or doesn't exist. Because on the face of it, it seems to make some sense. If a consciousness is mistaken, how can it be reliable? How can it reliably say, "Oh, this exists, but that doesn't"? Consciousness is mistaken. How can that be reliable? In fact, they go so far as to say, you prasangikas who are saying that sense consciousnesses are necessarily mistaken, these are actually then wrong consciousnesses. How can you now say that wrong consciousnesses are reliable or stable enough to be able to differentiate and say, "Oh, this exists and that doesn't exist"? So this is where the doubt is coming from, because the person with the doubt believes that a sense consciousness is a valid cognizer. It is free from fault. Whereas Prasangika are saying the sense consciousness, which is a valid cognizer, actually is mistaken. So this is where the question is coming from.
Rangu Bada, Semzam Bada, Dode Bada, and the Nambaina, Rangu Bas, Rangu Semzamba, and Dode Bajera Mawatunda, Console Ligore, then Dimen Bigeta, Namba Mina, Anchanda, Jungro, Console Ligore. Carresene Rangu Manchegi Suk the Ye, Ranching Duba Resur, Ranching Duba Relagore, Chisan Ranching Duban, Hinzang. Suk Toy, one shade, you suk ton, now, Corona Ranshin Juba now, and trio mares, Cora Temares, or that was it. Just a Ranshin Juba, Tema Chatter, just a trio man. Kuranga Turiel, Tenuba Kuranga didn't Turiel Lagina, just a called Loshe Chagres, or that Loshe Chagre, just a dinner Loshe Chasovina, quite tiny to you, but the Shahid, Lord Samaji shower, just a called Suk Toy, one shade, Loshe, Suk Topic, Topati, Loshe. Suk de la sopa tiny be treated Shag Pa George Semamin to us. Person like Chazan Trisha Chagi to us, just not Trisha, just not Trisha Chadu with them. Semamin to Mevanza, Tenjibu Choran and Shag Galahawaji to Jaira Samares or now Coron to Garson Ranshin Juba Nawadi, Ranshin Duba, Kuron Tenji, Ranshin Duba Nawa, Ranshin Maduba said, Bet, nor shall some go on that is some dire.
The questioner clearly has a problem with the Prasangika presentation. And that is because this questioner, if they're a Buddhist, would hold any of the non-Prasangika views. So the Svachantika, Chittamaja, Sautrantika, or Vaibhashika view holders would have this very doubt, because they assert that phenomena, that form, are inherently existent. They exist by way of their own nature. And non-Buddhists would most probably have the same doubt as well, also believing that form exists by way of its own nature. It has its own essence. And they think that Prasangika have gone way too far when they say that the object does not exist by way of its own nature. And now when they hear that they say that not only does an object not exist by way of its own nature, or it's not inherently existent, but the valid cognizer that establishes it, that is mistaken. Now the non-Prasangikas, their minds are blown. They're saying, you Prasangikas, you are wrong on on the consciousness, and you are wrong on the object of that consciousness. So we see here that there is a stark difference between the view of the Prasangika and the non-Prasangika, hence this question.
That in my Tenjubigi Liangor in ma, that they got a cabra shores ne, Dendrup Nawe, Trisha in Batans. Dendrup Nawe, Trisha in Batan. Ranyu Yozola, Milue, Sama Imba, Migas Kawayo Mares, Jaza. Konaya de la Yusum Peninsula Sobage, the Nigi, Sheba Meto, Toya, Sheba Chazan, Konaya True, the Carrot 2 Gores, and then to Ranching to Banawa de la Tuares, Mato, you, Zinda, you de la Trio Mares, Zinda, you de la Miluares, Zinda, you de Doguares, Miluares, Chazan Samares, 제상 고 체마 인자 고롱기 유 진바나 체마 유도 바나지 유디 숙샤 투고 숙도베 체마 미기 셰바디 숙샤 투고래 만에 메도 도베 체마디 유라 메도 요바나 메도 샤 투고 그래서 그런 체마레스 메도 도고로 수 도고 유디를 체마레 진다 유디 체마레스 그 가르 투고서는 데마투바 나와를 투고래 마도 유 숙데라 수다 메도들 투요 그런 진다 유를 투요 말레스 이 진단율을 추워래 라바이나 결혼시에바디 덴바레스 nga 노트 체고레스 이 진단율을 추와 마레스 라고 제상아 교요 마레스 월다 제사 유디 진단율을 맞추와 진단율이 체면 두고래 제사 체마래 유디 진단율이 샤 두고레스 이 추시레 라바세 추워래 라바데 가르라고서는 덴바 마두 유디 덴바 마두 신도 덴바 주변는 거와스 델로 추와래라고 그래스 이 캡라 체고레스 제사 나와 덴버도 나와를 추어당 유 진단 유래 체만이들아 나와요 말해서 그다디 주유다 진단 유라 진단 유다 진단 유들아
Now Prasangika present their case. They assert why their view is unmistaken. So the answer starts with, it is not contradictory for consciousness to be mistaken because objects appear to it as if they truly exist, and for it to be a valid cognizer because it is not deceived with respect to its main object. So this I mentioned in an earlier segment. So here, what is being stated, it is not contradictory for consciousness to be mistaken because objects appear to it as if they truly exist. So there's an appearance of true existence. With regard, the consciousness with regard to the appearance of true existence is mistaken. But, and then it continues, the sentence continues, and for it to be a valid cognizer because it is not deceived with respect to its main object. So not deceived, we perhaps more used to being, it's incontrovertible with regard to its main object. And its main object, as mentioned before, is the engaged object or the object of the mode of apprehension. So if the object was the flower, with regard to the flower itself, that's the object of the mode of apprehension, the consciousness is a valid cognizer with regard to it. And it is unmistaken. But with regard to the appearance of true existence, it is mistaken with regard to that.
Perna suksi mishe tabu sene suksi mishe tabu di suk temba drupa nawe chushe yin mes suk temba drupa nawa de la ko chushe re suksi mishe de da su jingi su dendru de mizin biche ko gari jingo sene 유디 수디 수기마 징거마도 수디 데마르바 징거 말레스 코 진다 유디를 수 샤고로 봐 제가 그런 게 수수 진바나신 수디 수레레로 와서 제가 코 참말에 제가 수수 진바레마도 수 데마르바 징요 말에 수 데마르바 나와들 추와래 수 데마르바 징요 말레스 제가 코 참말에 차들에
And the illustration is given. For example, a visual consciousness perceiving a form is indeed a mistaken consciousness because the form appears to it as truly existent. Okay, sorry, again I read both segments. For example, a visual consciousness perceiving a form is indeed a mistaken consciousness because the form appears to it as truly existent. So this is where the consciousness is mistaken in relation to true existence. However, and it continues, to the extent that it perceives the form as form and does not conceive the form to be inherently existent, it is a valid cognizer. So the second bullet point is in relation to the object of the mode of apprehension or the engaged object. So the object itself, there, it is a valid cognizer. It is incontrovertible, it is not deceived. But then for the preceding bullet point, in relation to the appearance of true existence, there it is mistaken. But it is a valid cognizer in relation to the object itself.
Dandala suk zimbigi migi sheba digi nayala temba tuba nangor suk temba tuba nangor tel true res mado suk temba tuba zingyo mares suk temba tuba zinna ko loshi res jezang ko suk shatu mares ta ko ane suk temba tuba mazin baje an skari zingor san suk di suk susi suk zingor was suk zimba na jin dola yore ko chemares jeza suk temba tuba zinna ko loshi re jeza ko suk yo ba shatu mares 인장 고숙 데마도 징교 말에 고숙 징고래 숙 징고래 제가 숙도 도고래 진짜 숙도 반자 고숙요 바샤 투고래.
So whilst there is an appearance of true existence, what this consciousness is actually apprehending is the object of the mode of apprehension, the form, object of form itself. And that's why it is a valid cognizer with regard to the form itself, because that is what it's apprehending. There's this appearance of true existence. If the consciousness was apprehending true existence, which does not exist, it would be a wrong consciousness. But what the object is apprehending is not the appearance of true existence, but it's apprehending the object itself, and therefore it is a valid cognizer. It's a valid cognizer because it's apprehending the object itself, and it's an unmistaken consciousness in relation to the object itself, but is mistaken in relation to the appearance of true existence. So it's mistaken in relation to the appearance of true existence, but it's not apprehending the true existence. It's actually apprehending the object itself. And therefore, it's a valid cognizer.
Der mazes nane ko sukto ba imba mas der mazes du sukto ba mase ane garji gorsne ane sukji mishi di suge nawa dang suk demba du be nawa la yan chemare se gor jesa sukji mishi di sukto ba mase suk nawa dia tu gore suk demba du ba nawa dia tu gore yes dele chemare se gor der maze sukji mishe de sugi nawadang ko garnang ros korno sug nangoro sug nawadi dogores ane di maze sug temba duba nawa sug temba duba nangore de nawa de la chemares dadi di chemares dadil ba pe ewa che de le keba sug temba duba nawege nawa chi ngores di dogores sug temba duba nangso de le chugores suk demdaba nangyode nawanza suk demdaba nangade nangyode chugores ina ko nawe nawa chigungo di dogora siwada suk di nangyode kala depende dile di dos kala hawore 지다 suk demdaba nawa layan chema yinsirwa 지다 suk di karna demdaba nangorwa nangyode kala ta korongo lolipa ngansu suyen la masone pen melona dayon de pen suyen ji char de gorwa di suyen ding de chime do gorwa ina suyen di ngan ju gi je신 나신 re samban nawa de chuwa che gor ina nawa suyen di ko do gorwa di nashi lo delia suk di demba tuba nangore su de tuba nang yo du chuwa re ina de ne ge nawe ge lo de nawa suyen ji gorwa di do gore je.
Now, in the third bullet point, it starts to go quite a lot subtler. We're getting further into that onion. So the first sentence, not only that, but a visual consciousness perceiving a form is also a valid cognizer with regard to the appearance of the form, and even with respect to the appearance of the form appearing to be truly existent.
제가 나 줄이야 멜로난 파 땅에도 나 저기 동기 수년지 멜로난 파 샤용으로 와 당한 저 샤용도 갈라 두파 따지 갈라 멜론의 지진이 수년이 나 저기 동랑은 낭도 나와 될 추어차 되로 와 제가 이나야 나위 편이 수년지로 와 니체메 도고로 와 제신 나위기 수년지 나와서 책을 나와로 뒤로 디나 생활 줄이야 수디 나 로를 파 나인데 덴버 주변 능고래 지자 되니게 수 동바 레스나 동바 나야 동바 임바 나야 줘봐 디나와들 임바 나야들 추와래 동 임바 나와들 추와래 마도 콘나에게 수년디 가지고 체면 도고로 니 도고로 언디 나신 다 숙데 덴버투바 나야도 숙 덴버투바 나와라 나와 덴버투바 임바 나와들 임바들 추서래 마도 숙 덴버투바 마로 숙 덴버투바 임바들 추고래 이내 되니게 나위게 로르파 나와지 용고래 디 나와디 도고래 쟤네 도고 나와지 용고래 아 덴버투바 나위 나와서 덴버투바 나위 맞아 멜라나로 수연 나위 편이 직수 나위 나와지 용고래 숙대 왕셰델라 숙낭용도 깔라 숙 덴버투바 임바신는 거래 숙 덴버투바 임바델라 추송래 다 숙 덴버투바 나위게 낭차지 용고로 와 낭차지 나와서 낭차지 용고로 와 될도고래 낭차리 도고래 덴버투바 말에디 유레데 낭유시오래 디 낭차디 디 도고래 제다다 숙 덴버투바 임바델라 추송래 제래 딩이디 되서한테 그 배야와 셀 되스칼이었다디.
So here we're looking at the appearing object. So here we can now take it deeper and to where the form appears as truly existent, the apprehending consciousness is mistaken with regard to the form which is appearing as truly existent. But another aspect that we can divide out here is the form, merely the form itself, without the true existence. With regard to the form itself that's appearing, there is not a mistake. So it's not mistaken with regard to the form that it's appearing, but with regard to the form appearing as truly existent, that's where the error lies. So to give an illustration, to hopefully make it a bit clearer, if we think of, in the morning, we look at our face in the mirror. So, with regard to seeing a mirror, of course, that's a valid cognizer, and no mistake there when we see the mirror. But when we see the reflection of our face, and to the extent that we believe that to be our face, that's mistaken. But in terms of the reflection, there it's not our consciousness, our apprehending consciousness is not mistaken with regard to the mere reflection, but to the reflection being our face. That's where the error lies. So again, when the object appears to us as being truly existent, there the apprehending consciousness is mistaken, because the object's appearing as truly existent. But in relation just to the aspects of that is the object that's appearing, there it's not mistaken.
직 메도tum라 닝주 직 니람나 통외나 다 마주게 다 되네기 니람나 니기 셰발라 되네기 나응도 가라 미기 셰바들 나외게 수년 로비치 요로와다 디 니람이 나외게 나와 디트나서 두고 수년디 수년 로비치 로바 다서 메론라 따이도 수년이 차기도와 디나시 되네 니람이 나라야 강바로 나외도 가라 되네 로라 나외 멜로나 나와 수면 나신 저로바 로레 샤르고로 니 나와서 디 딩아서 두고래 이나 데니기 메 닐람나 나의 강바디 강봉원에 임바신 난거데 원에 마르와다 원에 임바들로 추디거로다 추디거라 닐람이 제가 닐람이 강바디 요 마르와 니 제가 강봉원에 임바들로 추디바래 이나 데니게 강봉원에 많이 나야 롤파직 샤용도 갑로 롤파가 지금 수년 멜로나로 수년 샤와 나신 디 저부직 수년도 롤파 샤야지어로 나디야지어로 디 나와서 디 도고래 시요 Kangpa di lol pa nang de ka pen nga melon la du study ka le phini na sungye ji shar du do wa dina shin nilam ye kangpa ji lol pa nang de ka melon na lo sungye cha wa na ji lol pa ji di sungye na shin ji shar de ya jung go de le nang wa la go de di do go di yo de de ko lol pa won ne shar de wa yo de ina nilam ye kangpa di kangpa won ne yin ba de ma wa kangpa won ne yin ba de le chu du go de Kampong ini imba. True are he. Kampong ini nilam ni kampa de kampong ini marua. Jesan kampong ini marua. Kampong ini imba de samtana samdil true are he. True se. Macho yudile sunyen na che lolia che nawa chi yoro sunyen chi suan na chi ko benga so be sunyen na chi share yoro wa. Del macho are he ole. Ting an ni se son na jing do o dong e de ne tong song ji ji nawa jing go le ma so. O de de kampa de ne du an ji sa ji de ne du sa ji ni lam tong ho se de ma so ki nawa de jing go ma de ji kampa mo ni de de ha ho yo ma de yo ma do.
If you take another illustration, say, of a dream. So, in a dream, let's say, there's a lovely home in a beautiful environment. So we have this appearing to us. And as far as, to the extent that we just apprehending this appearance, that's fine. That's not mistaken. But in as regard that we are apprehending this house and its beautiful environment as a house and a beautiful environment, that just doesn't exist. This is a dream. So it's just appearances to our dream. So the consciousness is not mistaken with regard to the mere appearance, but it is mistaken with regard to what is appearing as if it existed. For example, as if there were a house and an environment. So that's similar then with the illustration of the reflection earlier.
Jesan sheba said yuji ripi sheba says Yorba. Jesa yuji sheba laadi kanichi lagors unity number sherby topki di number chendo kepi sashi ribala sheba sawa yes.
And it continues, as in the statement, a consciousness knows its object. A consciousness is clear and knowing because it is produced in the image of its object through the force of the appearance of its object.
Da yu sheba se yu digi karin goras ne sheba telya number shelgo reshi number shelgo singa melona da de melona lo sunyen ji shelgo dina shi yu kare ibi ne yu sheba digi yu de jin so de yu de mi de sheba tela denigi melona sunyen shawa na shin 대단 저부터 넘버 쉐고레스 다 넘버디 쉐비 디톱기 아니 데 유디 진비기 넘버 젠세데 넘버 젠도 기비기 사시 유디 진비기 단 쉐바샤고레스 제가 데니치라 네 쉐바 사시 리발라고레스.
So here we have to read it again. As in the statement, a consciousness knows its object. A consciousness is clear and knowing because the consciousness is produced in the image of its object through the force of the appearance of the object. So through the force of the appearance of the object, through that, the object is known. And this way, the consciousness would be said to be unmistaken. So through the force of the appearance of the object, the consciousness is produced in the image of its object. And this then is the meaning of a consciousness knows its object.
And then in the Nina Jingye Sheba Gan Yin Yang, Nina Jingye Sheba Gan Yin Yang, and the Rangi Nawala, Wonsumi, Tamaimbe, Chabar Sung, that is the Tenjubigi. Tumo ma imbe lure da tenju beke nina jenge sheba kande chine ya rangi yu nawa tela monsumi tsemare eso 텐주비루라 가르소네 유디 가르스나 윤니나쟁이 셰바서 동용어스도 비켄바 마인 바서 다니나쟁이 군습게 나와 유디 겐게 셰바 간디치 임베나 디유 나위게 나와텔라 모스미 차아레 에스네 데 텐주비기도 킬링거 레제레.
Over the page, we have the final bullet point here. And this then lays out the unique view of the Prasangika that has been asserted in this answer. Hence, the Buddha taught that all dualistic consciousnesses are necessarily direct valid cognizers pertaining to the appearance of their object. So, just as we've seen in the previous segment, that how the object apprehends how the consciousness apprehends its object is through the force of the object appearing to consciousness. Therefore, that despite being a dualistic consciousness, it is a valid cognizer with regard to the appearance of the object. And dualistic consciousness makes it clear that it's referring to a consciousness other than the wisdom that is directly realizing emptiness. So all other consciousnesses are included here as a dualistic consciousness, but they remain, despite being dualistic, a valid cognizer in relation to the appearance of their object.
나와 지고래. 진예 유라고 말. 다들 진당 진예 유라는 진당 유차로 거와. 셰바 록셰 인베네 소르다 록셰 인베네 체마 이민기 쉬어 말. 록셰 인네 체마 있는 니나쟁이 군습기 나와 유행지다. 셰바 간에 신베네 코라 나와 딜레 체마레스. 베네 록셰 인네 자타바지메 또바디 록셰레 이네 그러나 나와들라 참아래서 진짜 디텐유베 투모마비 유 데네랑에 나와라 참아인고 에세 텐유베 투모마이 말이야 랑게 나와라 참아래서 근데 덴진 여러와 덴바도 바지베 덴진 샤다 따바지메 따진 샤다 차선 록셰로 바지소 데네 메 록셰레데 이네 코로 데지 유 가르는 거서 나와 가르서는 코로나 숭인 나실로야 샤야게 숭인 나지 여러와 We
can understand from this, and hopefully it'll come clear as we continue, that according to this unique view of Prasangika, wrong consciousnesses too are valid cognizers, in the same way as with the illustration of a reflection. So with regard to their object, that appears to them, the apprehending consciousness is a valid cognizer. So this will be quite different from what we've heard before, because it is a unique view of the Prasangika.
유지 코 릭발라는 또 발래 거려와 지사 그런 거 유지 그런 거 또야지 그거래 유 또야지 그거 니 또야지 맨날 거 셰바 책고 말해 제자디 고엔자디 랑게 나와디 또 거래스 저 록셰 있나야 이나라 록셰 맨나다 록셰 맨바이나 그런 진다요 또 두고와 다 록셰 인바이나 그런 나와 또 거래 제자 릭바세 돈다 참고래세 디시 거래.
In the preceding bullet point, we had the quotation, a consciousness knows its object. Here we can understand know as to know or to realize its object. So therefore, without this aspect of knowing its object, it cannot be a consciousness. A consciousness necessarily knows its object. So therefore, even a wrong consciousness must know its object. So this again then is a unique. This is the unique view of the Prasangika that is being presented here in the answer.
nga so ge da de su se de nga su ya bena sik me do ro shi nga me do pa sha na she de me do de nga so le pa jin du ka la jin yo de ka la de me do de pa lo la ya wa she su nang ro ha na du ka la an me do kho ra nang go res an de la kar nang go de da nyum do kar nang go se me do di pa lo sha pa la ma de pa lo sha pa la ma de rang ngong ni du ba na de go res lo sha pa la ma de pa me do nang go ro wa na de me do de pa lo sha pa ro wa chỉ là luyện xả bảo là mà đối bảo rằng muốn chụp nâng cổ đấy, thì điểm chụp năng suy đượcว่าluyện xả bảo là mà đối, mấy đồ chính bị xếp vào đây là mấy đồ nâng cổ đấy, mấy đồ năng hoàn năng gì mấy đồ đều要把它拿要的些，但mấy đồ năng对，mấy đồ的năng汤肯定是能过的，năng都肯定是能过的是呢，mấy đồ thì luyện怕xả bảo là mà对bảo可能muốn chụp些能过的些的，你năng suy的点把chụp năng suy的些。但俺这个什么哪里啊？没多的那玩那心那水的了你有了吧？但没多的那玩那水直接没多的绿爬下巴那么不可能我呢住对吧？有把那水你用过的，你有把那呢？俺这个点不住把那让我们住把那玩那心有了什么金白切没多的都什么金白呢？对了车马差的个嘞，差了。但真正有练过的话，还没多难是吧？没多难话呢，经过了那边的真正练过了，就是看着累的了，看着难过的是呢，没多钱难过的，没多点不住把人难过的也觉得。那对个不当下就那对个的，一级写不的个，往写的了，天天那有对，当下就一级写不的个，没多的那话那些就没多都什么金牌呢？点不住把的这什么当过嘛是吧？没多都只有是怎么呢？第六段推的，可是没多都是金巴那原来没多的有的话，就是金大鱼的有的吧，这可落段切过来。但的那个那样的搞不啦，安那样没多的都什么切，没多的刚来嘛，让我们主把那完他就刚来嘛，就让我们主把热下的那些都什么刚来嘛对吧？就都什么金巴呢？的点不主把金巴电视查，没多的点不主把金巴查着过来。第电视是落写的，就是没多的往下了，那样的搞不啦，没多可能是能，没多可能刚来嘛，让我们的主把是那你能够，那是你多啊，那你能够的，你那都搞到俺就一级写白给怕什么大的，没多那完了是没多是都什么金白呢，个落断绝的，个金大鱼的没多的要的。但第那是没多的什么大，没多那的，让我们的主把那完的了，修起来大些，没多的略怕下巴了嘛对吧？让我们的主把那星期都上不进白呢，没多点不主不进上来的，第六的落下下上来的。是的，点不主不，那时点不主那完了，你热下什么过了吧？对的。
Staying with our favorite flower, we have a flower that appears to sense consciousness, but all that appears will be the color and the shape. Then there's a mental consciousness that apprehends this as a flower and labels it as a flower. That consciousness is factually concordant, because this is a flower. What has appeared to it is a flower that has been perceived by the sense consciousness, and it has been labeled a flower. It's factually concordant. But should a further consciousness conceptual consciousness engage with the flower that has appeared to it, saying, this flower is truly existent, it is independent, it exists in the way that it appears, that then will be a wrong consciousness, because the flower does not exist in the way that it appears. So whilst what appears to the consciousness is a flower, and it appears as being truly existent, should the conceptual consciousness just engage with it as a flower, then it's factually concordant, it's a valid cognizer, no problem. But should conceptual consciousness interact with this flower as being truly existent, then it's a wrong consciousness.
Tanga jo kansa setting ka nga se sam dang de ka nga jo ki nga se di yo chi lo pa chi neng go wa nang to kapla nga tie nang go re nga na to kapla ka la ma to rang wen tu ba lue pha sha ba la ma rang wen tu ba che nang go re che sa nga de yue la yong to kapla nga zu lo de la nga se nang go re de le na tha ni yo ro ba da nga ko ron nang go re nga na wa na shi nga de yue de ba re wa che sa da nga di ka la ma to ba rang wen tu ba lue pha sha ba la ma rang wen tu ba nang go re di na su di yo ma ro ba da na di de ba tu ba na su de ro ba che sa nga na su ni yo ba na shi nga na wa na shi nga yo re se be sam lo di ta nga chimbe chimba ko lo duen de ro wa nga yo ban yo re sem pe sam lo di lo duen de cha go re di lo xie ma re che ma re cha go re che sa nga da ni be de nga ra shin du ba ga la ma de le pha sha ba la ma rang mo du ba na wa na shin an de ne shi du sam jin ba na nga de ba du ba ji bi tin sin sa cha ro go da di de ne jin bi lo de da nga ju ge ka so re nyo mo ba nyo so ye nyo mo ba nyo ya ge ju zo di de si go ro da 그 증거가 되네시 낭수디 덴버주방 갈라마 랑고도 나나나도 디나시 두세베 증거로 와 진바시 똑바시기거로 와 디록셰레제.
Let's take as an illustration as a person, and from the translator's side, maybe I'll say it in a way now that is going to be a bit clearer. So the person appears to us, or the self, the person appears to us as being truly existent. But we can say that there are two ways that the person appears to us. So there's an appearance, but we can divide it into two parts or two aspects. So there's merely the I, the mere me that appears, and the consciousness that apprehends this is factually concordant and a valid cognizer. So the thought that I'm sitting here, merely that, I'm sitting here. The consciousness that is apprehending this appearance of the truly existent I as just, I'm sitting here, this is factually concordant and a valid cognizer. But then the other aspect of the same appearance is that the I that is truly existent and the consciousness apprehending the I as being truly existent, as being independent, that is the ignorance of self-grasping. That is the root cause of all our afflictions. So the consciousness that apprehends the truly existent I as existing in the way that it appears, this is the ignorance of self-grasping. Another consciousness that apprehends the same I that appears, but just as the I, nothing more than that. That is factually concordant and a valid cognizer.
rangi tsindan yu nang yu le chuwa re de rashing yu juba nang yu chela chugo re ma do ben su de jimbe chema de lo de ju tani be chemi ge sa ji ge chasan chema chasan tani be chema chasan tani be chema chasan tani be chema se yo ro dong yong wo sun de lo ma yin gen ge da no din ye tani be chema yu su la so ba da na yu chema chasan rangi tsindan yu jimbe ge do be lo de tsindan yu le chuwa ma re ma chue na ya 코도 덴버 두바나에 첼라 추고레스 제자다 디직체 개발직체 랑기 진다 유딜을 추고 말에 랑기 유디 낭유도 랑싱이 마주바 랑원이 주바는 거래 덴버 주바는 거래 덴버 두바나에 첼라 추고레스 디 송타 직체 인데 다 나니나 징이 셰바 록셰이나다 록셰마이나 이나 징이 셰바 간에지 이나 징이 셰바라도 군습기 나와 유행 셰바시고래 군습인 동용어 순대비 캠바 많이 받으시고래 되니 니나징이 셰바 간에 집에이네 소소로 유간에 나와 여바시 나와인다 매바시 나와인다 나노리 갑라 디 유디 수년 로비치 콜롤 바차야지 수년 로지 용고래 나와 친구래 나와서 수년 로 차돼 디 나의 수년 로비데 예되래 델 체마이메 캡세 체마이 고래 세 텐주비 송타직제 니바치제
Summarize what we've looked at tonight. So just talking about consciousnesses apprehending conventionally existent objects, so not referring to the wisdom directly realizing emptiness, then a consciousness that's apprehending a conventionally existent object is a valid cognizer in relation to its object of the mode of apprehension, the engaged object, and is also not mistaken with regard to the appearance of that object, but the mere appearance of the object. With regard to the object appearing as truly existent, there it is mistaken. Whether a consciousness, and then furthermore, whether a consciousness is a wrong consciousness or not a wrong consciousness, it is a valid cognizer with regard to the appearance of its object. So, like with the illustration of the reflection, apprehending the object merely as a reflection is not. It is a valid cognizer with regard to the mere reflection, not to as if taking the face as being a face, as being the actual face. So there it would be mistaken. So this then, what we've been hearing here in the reply tonight, is a unique view of the Prasangika. Our time is up. If you have burning questions, feel free to ask. If you can't stay for the questions, feel free to go. Gyatso?
Just the point of page 10. The Buddha taught that all dualistic consciousnesses are necessarily direct, valid, cognizers pertaining to the appearance of the object. Does that mean that the conceptual consciousness is a direct, valid cognizer in relationship to the appearing object?
So is the conceptual consciousness a direct, valid cognizer in relation to its appearing object?
Yeah, because it says all dualistic consciousness.
Is a conceptual consciousness a valid cognizer in relation to its appearing object?
Well, that's what it says.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a direct, valid cognizer with relation. A conceptual consciousness is a direct, valid cognizer with relation to its appearing object. In other words, yes.
To the meaning generality.
Di Geshe ma tenju bilu la ngosum tsema se yu dala tine ma toba dala tin mo ba khoron toba ngosum toba la gore gyumchen samma ta mo che tang ju gyumchen samda jeba gyumchen samda toba ina dala tin toba le so re di jeba tsema cha ro ngosum di ngosum tsema di ngosum tsema ma re benang ju suk meji yoban gyumchen samda je ode me 그래서 가르친 두아 등기두아 세비기 니니기 두아이 비김세 삼다시 메디어 하고나 데라 메디라 제바세 말이야. 진짜 메디를 무슨 제마 제거 말 김세 삼다도 그러. 나와서 디고 코로나 다라 또 와서마도 데리아 나와데 간디도 이비 김세 삼다 두고 말아. 진짜 김세 제바 맞제바지 권야 김세 야달라 맞제 맞제 고도서 다야달라 맞제 또 봐이나 무슨 또 봐라 텐지부 송다래. So in
the context of the Prasangika, there's no discussion here with relation to the appearing object and the object itself and the meaning generality. Because it's a direct, valid cognizer, it is a direct, valid cognizer with regard to its appearing object. If one starts to talk about a meaning generality, then there's analysis engaging. The analysis is engaging, which would mean it's no longer a direct valid cognizer. So there's no thought about meaning generality in this regard. So just like when we see smoke in the distance, in the forest, the sense consciousness is a direct valid cognizer to the smoke. To ascertain that there's fire will require reasoning. So just like then here, in terms of what appears to the conceptual consciousness, merely with regard to what appears to this conceptual consciousness, it is a direct valid cognizer with regard to that. So there's no reasoning, so there's no discussion about a meaning generality or not.
I mean, I can see that it's a valid cognizer. Why is it?
Because if it's a valid cognizer, it's direct or it's inferential, and whether it's direct or inferential is dependent on whether reasoning is involved or not. If it's a valid cognizer and it's reasoning, it's inferential. If it's a valid cognizer and reasoning is absent, it's direct. Simply that.
Cognizer is a dualistic consciousness, right?
Sorry, I missed the first word. What?
Inferential cognizer is a dualistic consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But from one side you're saying it's not a valid, it's not direct.
Mm-hmm.
But then the sentence says it is direct. It says this dualistic consciousness, all dualistic consciousnesses are direct, necessarily direct valid cognizers.
I'm not too sure in the question here.
The inferential cognizer is not a direct valid cognizer.
Okay. An inferential valid cognizer.
An inferential valid cognizer is not a direct cognizer.
Yes.
But it's dualistic.
Yes.
So here it's saying it is direct.
Okay. So because it says all dualistic consciousnesses, therefore this must mean that inferential valid cognizers are direct.
Yeah.
Is that it? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
rangi jeba tsema de rangi nawa de la onsum tsema re se ora jeba tsema de korong jinda yu de la jeba tsema ja onsum tsema mare bene ngazu de ji mena ju gyumsen samda jeba cheji gyumsen samda me de to de ko me de la ane jeba tsema de onsum chego mare da me de jeba tsema me to de korong me de korong le nawa ji horwa to jeba de le ka nawa chunguro ba 디 나와디 거를 김전 삼단 거 제바진 나와디 인비 제바지고 말아 제가 나와 또 거래서 제가 될래야 무슨 체 말해서 랑기 진다 유딜라 유딜라 제바체 말해 무슨 말해 그런 거 제바체 말해 그런 진다 유딜라 제바체 말해 무슨 말해지 그런 진다 유딜라 다 진다 유디기 그런은 제바들 나와서 연구로 와 나와들라 무슨 말해지.
So if we take the illustration of realizing fire independence on seeing the reason, independence on the reason of seeing smoke, it's an inferential valid cognizer in relation to the fire. It is also a direct valid cognizer in relation to its appearing object, because the appearing object is being directly realized, but that there is fire in relation to the object of the mode of apprehension, there is an inferential valid cognizer, but in relation to its appearing object, it's a direct valid cognizer. So again, it's an inferential valid cognizer in relation to its object of the mode of apprehension, but it is a direct valid cognizer in relation to the appearing object, because the appearing object is directly realized.
And I can see the visual consciousness is direct, but the meta consciousness indirect.
It's direct with relation to its appearing object.
Which is the meaning generality, surely.
다 나유도 된지레스나 다 되니게 된지지에 는 거래. 제바 세마기 미 된지되는 거를 미 된지될 또 두고래. 니 원숨래. 원숨 차고래. 제바디기 미 된지디 미 또야디 김천 삼단에 매 또제 그 매디 진다유지 매델라 제바 세마제. 다미 나유 된지 두고래스네 다 된지될라 안에 원숨 제말 원숨래스. 그래서 된지디 임비 김천 제바제는 두고 말 그 나섬이 두고로 와. 저 된지될 원숨래스. 다 똑바디기 나유 된지 좋은 거래. 다 될래 원숨래스. 될라 나유 세디 그런 게 나외 나와 낭수디다 매기 나외기 나와 지금 그러와 나와 지금 그래. 될라 데미티제 차지야 요시기래 된지대야 요래. 나유세디 된지야 요래 될라. 된지대야 능고로 나유 능고래.
So in relation to the appearing object, this consciousness is the direct valid cognizer, and the appearing object will have aspects including the meaning generality, as well as a what do we say this?
된지디 랍산지고라. 그 나유 똑바디기 매기 똑바데 매진비기 제바디 매도베 제바데라 매기 된지디 능고로 와데 그 나유디 된지디 나 능고래 될래야 원숨레스 원숨 참아레스.
So it's a direct valid cognizer in relation to its appearing object, which has a meaning generality. Okay.
I'll think about it.
Then tomorrow we'll go into it further.